My name is Dave Jester, and I am chairman of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area Board. Before I start the June 1st, 2020 CBPA Board virtual public hearing, I turn the meeting over to staff for opening remarks. Staff, the meeting is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area Board, for your participation today. For those of you in attendance for today's CBPA Board virtual public hearing, my name is PJ Scully, and I am staff liaison to the CBPA Board. Due to the current situation surrounding the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, today's meeting is being conducted electronically in accordance with the Virginia Code 2.2-3708.2, Section A, subsection 3, Virginia Code 15.2-1413, and the city's Continuity of Government Ordinance adopted on March 31st, 2020, and Chapter 854 of the 2019 Acts of Assembly, as amended, with the chair of the Virginia Beach CBPA Board having called this special meeting for today's public hearing. Also, please note this meeting is being recorded. For today's agenda, there are 8 items. The CBPA Board will hear 2 items of old business and 6 items of new business. One agenda item is requesting a deferral. That is agenda item number 1-409, Susan Constant Drive. There are 4 agenda items recommended by staff to be items considered for the board's consent agenda. Staff will discuss them in further detail later on. But those agenda items are item number 3, 625 Timberland Trail. Item number 4, 1440 West Little Neck Road. Item number 6, 1460 North Woodhouse Road. And item number 8, 1000 Curlew Drive. At the end of staff's presentation for each agenda item, staff will open the floor for questions. It is important that board members hold their questions and comments until recognized. Also, it is helpful for board members upon completion of a comment or of a question to state that you are done making your point and that you will stand by for a response to your question. This helps ensure that it is understood that you are done speaking and that your questions have been answered before staff moves on to the next question or board agenda item. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, there are approximately 10 speakers registered for today's public hearing. Agenda item number 1, 1 speaker. Agenda item number 2, 3 speakers. Staff will be reading in 1 letter of opposition. Agenda item number 3 through 8 each have 1 speaker registered for them. Staff will attempt to facilitate real-time citizen participation and comments in this public hearing for these citizens who are registered. To ensure this live electronic public hearing is successful, please note the following meeting instructions must be followed. CBPA Chairman will open the public hearing. Order of business will be described by the chair. Agenda items will be presented and addressed by the order of business. Order of business will be agenda items being withdrawn or requesting deferral, which staff mentioned we have 1 today. Agenda items recommended for consent by staff for the board's deliberation. And then next, we will move into the regular agenda items. Staff will present each agenda item and then call the applicant or applicant's agent to the platform. Those who have registered in advance with staff to speak on an agenda item will be called to speak in the order which they registered. Speakers will have up to 3 minutes to make their comments. If a speaker does not respond, or if a technical issue occurs, which renders the communication or comments unintelligible, staff will move on to the next registered speaker and attempt to reestablish the connection. Board members and audience, please mute any additional devices you may have in the room to avoid unnecessary noise and/or the possibility of echoing or reverberation through the microphone. It is important that once your name is called, please wait 2 to 3 seconds to ensure that you are unmuted so that the board, staff, and the public will hear your comments completely. Please begin your comments by acknowledging your oath and then identifying yourself. Also, do not ask if we can hear you, as the only feed open is yours at the time to minimize echoing and reverberation, and as such, you will be unable to hear a response. All votes for today's virtual public hearing and the roll call will be taken verbally, and staff will call board members by alphabetical order of their last name. At the conclusion of today's public hearing, the CBPA board will move to close the public hearing. The chair will ask for a motion and a second amongst the CBPA board members. Mr. Chairman and members of the CBPA board, are there any questions about this process? If you have any questions at this time, please raise your virtual hand. Having seen none, again, staff would like to thank you, and I will now turn the meeting over to Chairman Jester to open the public hearing. Mr. Jester, the microphone is yours.
Welcome to the June 1st, 2020 virtual public hearing for the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area Board. As previously mentioned, please mute any additional devices you have in the room to avoid any unnecessary background noise or the possibility of reverberation or echoing. It is important that once your name is called, please wait 2 to 3 seconds to ensure that we will all hear your complete remarks. Please begin your comments by identifying yourself. Also, do not ask, "Can you hear me?" as only one feed is open at a time to minimize the echo or reverberation, and as such, you will be unable to hear a response. If you plan on giving testimony before the board today, you will be sworn in individually at the beginning of the agenda item you plan to give testimony upon. The order of business today will be as follows: withdrawal and deferred agenda items. First is the consideration of requests to be withdrawn or deferred. If the item you registered to speak on is requested to be deferred, you will be called upon to make your opposition known. However, please speak only to the matter of the deferral and not to the merits of the item. We have item number 1 is a request for deferral. Next is the consent agenda. These are items that the board looks favorably upon and are without opposition. If you wish to speak to an item on the consent agenda, you will be called upon when the item is called. If there is opposition to an item on the consent agenda, it would be moved to the regular agenda to be heard in its normal order. Consent items will be voted upon as a block and will not be brought up again for further consideration. We have 4 items on the consent for today. Regular agenda items are next. The regular agenda items, these are items that proceed in the following manner: summary of the application by staff, statements by the applicant or agent and proponents, statements by any opponents, rebuttal by the applicant or agent, and finally, deliberation and disposition of the application by the board. During board deliberation, there will be no further public comment unless a question is asked by the board. The board will remind all participants that the applicant is limited to 10 minutes, and all other speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. Staff will be timing presentations and will mute the speaker at the end of 3 minutes. There will be an opportunity for the board to ask questions of both the applicant and of the speakers if desired. Finally, we have show cause and restoration agenda items. There are no show cause or restoration items on the agenda today. Please note that any action of the board today may be appealed to the Virginia Beach Circuit Court within 30 days. The board may take a break with the time and length of the meeting today, but that will be at our discretion. Finally, all fees payable to the City of Virginia Beach for an application must be paid for an application to be considered complete. The first item before us today is the approval of the minutes from the May 18th, 2020 CBPA Board Virtual Public Hearing. Please raise your virtual hand if there are any additions or corrections to the minutes. Mr. Scully?
Mr. McCoy, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
To make a motion to approve the minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Board Member McCoy has requested to make a motion. You now have the floor to call a second.
Would somebody like to second Mr. McCoy's motion?
Mr. Jones, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
I second Mr. McCoy's motion.
Mr. Chairman, a second to the approval of the May 18th minutes has been given. At this time, a motion to approve the minutes to the May 18th CBPA virtual public hearing has been made by Mr. McCoy, seconded by Mr. Jones. The vote is open, and staff will call each board member individually. If you are in favor of the motion, please say yes. If you are opposed, please say no. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Dreps, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Jester, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Jones, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. McCoy, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Smith, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Steyer, your microphone is open.
Yes.
And Mr. Wallace, your microphone is open.
Yes.
This vote will also serve as a roll call of those present today. Mr. Chairman, we do have a quorum, and the conditions from the May 18th, 2020 CBPA virtual public hearing has passed. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, we will now move on to items of withdrawal or deferral. We have one agenda item requesting a deferral today. That is agenda item number 1. If staff's presentation could be presented, thank you. Agenda item number 1, 409 Susan Constant Drive. Are there any board members abstaining to this agenda item? At this time, please raise your virtual hand for staff to address. Seeing none, staff calls the applicant's agent to speak. A reminder that your time is limited to 10 minutes. Please pause 3 seconds before you begin to speak. When speaking, please acknowledge your oath. state your name, state whether your disclosure statements are complete and your fees have been paid. At this time, staff will acknowledge Mr. Billy Garrington. Mr. Garrington, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Garrington, the microphone is now yours.
So help me God, I do.
Mr. Garrington, the microphone will be back to you to proceed with the request to defer. Mr. Garrington, the microphone is yours.
We are requesting the deferral. We thank you very much for being in support of this request. The disclosure statement is current. All fees have been paid.
Thank you, Mr. Garrington. At this time, are there any questions by the board members to the applicant? If so, please raise your hand. At this time, no hands have been raised. So, Mr. Chairman, staff opens the mic to any board member with comments to this agenda item. Staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
A motion. I would like to make a motion to defer agenda item number 1, 409 Susan Constant Drive, applicant Jeremy and Natalie Biggie.
Mr. Chairman, staff opens the mic to you to call for a second.
Do we have a second to Mr. Jones' motion?
Staff acknowledges the virtual hand of Mr. McCoy. As a potential second, Mr. McCoy, your microphone is now open.
I second Mr. Jones' motion.
Hearing a second, a motion to defer the application of 409 Susan Constant Drive has been made by Mr. Jones, a second by Mr. McCoy. The vote is open, and staff will call each board member individually. If you are in favor of the motion, please say yes. If you are opposed, please say no. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Dreps, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Jester, your microphone is open. Jones, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. McCoy, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Smith, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Steyer, your microphone is open.
Yes.
And last, Mr. Wallace, your microphone is open.
Yes.
By a vote of 9-4, 0 against, the motion to indefinitely defer the variance request at 409 Susan Constant Drive has been approved. Staff will now move on to potential items of consent for the consent agenda. Next is the consent agenda items. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, After reviewing staff's report and the associated CBPA exhibits provided by the applicant, staff has recommended the following agenda items for the board's consideration to consent. Agenda item number 3, 625 Timberland Trail. The request that you have in front of you today is to construct a wood deck off of the existing residential structure. You will see that the aerial of the site is a moderately wooded residential lot, and the proposed improvements are off of the existing structure, which is currently being renovated. Site photos on the left-hand side of the screen indicate the location of the improvements in relationship to the existing residential structure and a distance of approximately 70 feet from the edge of water, which is currently vegetated with turf. Staff moves on to the next agenda item. Agenda item number 4, 1440 West Little Neck Road. The request that you have in front of you today for agenda item number 4 is encroachment into the resource protection area buffer to construct an in-ground swimming pool and modification to the existing paver patio with an addition to the primary structure. One of the reasons why staff recommending this item to the consent agenda, when we conducted our field visit, we actually met the property owner out at the lot, and he was describing that with the addition to the primary structure, they're going to demolish the existing garage and rebuild it and add a second story. In doing that, they're going to demolish the structure so that they have easy construction access into the rear yard and not go around the existing structure to avoid having to remove any trees or potentially impacting the critical root zone of those trees. Once the swimming pool is constructed and those contractors demobilize, they will then construct the addition to the primary structure. Looking at the presentation, you will see that this lot is heavily wooded. In the upper right-hand corner of staff's slide, you will see where that addition to the primary structure will occur, and also how they will utilize that for construction access. The bottom left-hand corner is the rear yard. And then just to go into the presentation quickly, you will see highlighted in yellow in the upper right-hand corner the addition to the primary structure, the location of the swimming pool, and then going down into some site photos. The top panoramic is the rear yard, and that swimming pool will be landward of that existing paver patio. The bottom panoramic is the view out to the Lynnhaven River. You can see that we are a heavily vegetated lot, almost a field of azaleas from the rear of the property all the way down to the water's edge. All of that vegetation will be retained. Agenda item number 6, 1460 North Woodhouse Road. The request that you have in front of you is encroachment into the resource protection area buffer to construct a single-family residence with associated accessory structures. Looking at the aerial, you will see where the existing residential structure sits. That will be demoed and a new single-family residence constructed. On the right-hand side of the screen, you will see that there is a paved construction access way, as well as an area for stockpiling and staging for the construction of the single-family residence. Looking at the site photos, the top panoramic is a view of the front yard. Like I said, a substantial amount of redevelopment will occur with the new single-family residence being constructed in the approximate same location of the existing There will be expansions to the proposed improvements with a larger single-family residence. And then at the bottom of the staff's presentation, you will see a panoramic of the rear of the property. Location of the existing residence with the associated proposed improvements are relatively in the same foot of the existing that you see in those photos. And then looking at the proposed improvements to the right-hand side, you'll see how that single-family residence sits on the lot located in the 50-foot landward variable width buffer and resource management area of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And last, staff recommended agenda item number 8, 1000 Curlew Drive. The request that you have in front of you today is encroachment into the resource protection area buffer to construct a single-family residence with associated structures. Presented on the screen right now on the left-hand side, you will see the existing conditions submitted by the engineer of record, and to the right, the proposed improvements. The engineer of record has also provided for the board's review a color analysis. Everything that you see in blue is the existing footprint of the current improvements on the lot, and everything in red you will see as proposed improvements with this variance request. Of note, on the bottom right-hand side, those areas colored in green, those offer a retreat of the existing driveway. One of the conditions that staff did apply to this is that the driveway stem of the proposed circular drive be constructed out of permeable pavers. Staff is of the opinion that from the corner of Curlew Drive and also from the corner of North Oriole Drive, the existing grade of those roads are higher than the lot. So you get a lot of sheet flow coming off of the public right-of-way, going down through this property. Staff's of the opinion that the use of permeable pavers on the stem portion of that driveway will act as a level spreader and a means to filter some of the stormwater runoff. You'll also note on this that there's a conceptual layout for buffer restoration along the existing riprap of the property. Quick look at the site photos. The top panoramic is pictures taken from North Oriole Drive in the existing residence. On the lower panel, you will see pictures from the existing floating dock looking at the very narrow peninsula portion of this lot. With that narrow peninsula portion of the lot, there are no proposed improvements associated in that area. At this time, those are all the items recommended for consent by staff. Staff asks that if there are any board members who desire to hear any of these agenda items on the regular agenda at this time, please raise your virtual hand. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, staff acknowledges your hand. Your microphone is open.
Thank you. I do not support application number 4.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. We will move agenda item number 4 to the regular business agenda items. At this time, are there any other board members that would like to speak to agenda item number 3, agenda item number 6, and agenda item number 8 on the consent agenda? If so, please raise your hand. At this time, Staff? Okay. We were going to call June's hand, but June, you put your hand down. Thank you. Staff will one more time call if there are any questions regarding agenda item 3, 6, and 8 as consent agenda items. Please raise your virtual hand. Mr. Chairman, staff does not see any other virtual hands. So at this time, staff is going to proceed with agenda item 3, 6, and 8, calling the applicant or their agent up for their oath in their agreement to staff's conditions. Agenda item number 3, 625 Timberland Trail. At this time, staff will acknowledge Miss Eva Daly. Miss Daly, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Miss Daly, the microphone is yours. Mr. Chairman, at this time, staff does not see Miss Eva Daly in the call-in, nor do we see Mr. or Mrs. Barney at this time.
Barney is here.
Okay, actually, correction, we do see Mr. Barney. Ms. Barney, at this time, your microphone is open.
Yes. Hi. I don't know why Eva's not on. And we, in place of we're a heavily wooded area. We were going to plant a Texas mountain laurel, which we have growing right now, and a dogwood and 3 azaleas for approval to help maintain the property. And my husband loves trees. So we are not getting rid of anything.
Thank you, Ms. Barney. At this time, staff muted your microphone. We will unmute you in one moment. I just need you to acknowledge your oath, indicate that your fees have been paid, that your disclosure statements are current, and that you are in agreement with staff's conditions as written in the staff report. At this time, Ms. Barney, staff opens your microphone.
Yes.
Thank you. At this time, staff will move on to agenda item number 6, 1460 North Woodhouse Road. Before staff calls the applicant, we will remind the applicant to please state that you agree with the oath, state your name, indicate that your fees have been paid, and that your disclosure statements are current, and that you agree to all of the conditions within the staff's report. This will be Mark Garrett for Eddie Burdon. At this time, Mr. Burdon, Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Bourdon, the microphone is now yours.
Thank you, PJ. I do, as an officer of the court, I do not have to take an oath, but I absolutely do swear to tell the truth. I'm representing Mr. and Mrs., well, Bill and Luann Freeman Reno. All of their fees have been paid. Their disclosure is still accurate. We appreciate your work, PJ, and all the board members. All 15 conditions as recommended in the staff report are agreed upon by the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Bourdon. At this time, staff moves on to agenda item number 8, 1000 Curlew Drive. We will now hear from the applicant. The applicant, Mr. Garrington, is reminded to state that your disclosure statements are current, your fees have been paid, and that you agree to the conditions in the staff report. For all board members, Mr. Garrington was sworn in during the item to be deferred. At this time, Mr. Garrington, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, PJ. Thank you, members of the board. For the record, Billy Garrington on behalf of the applicants, Ralph and Brenda Knapp, property known as 1000 Curlew Drive. There are 16 conditions in the staff write-up. We're in total agreement with all 16 conditions. Our disclosure statement is current. All of our fees have been paid, and we thank you very much for your assistance in this request.
Thank you, Mr. Garrington. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, that completes our consent agenda. At this time, are there any further questions for any of the applicants or staff at this time? If so, please raise your hand. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, PJ. When reviewing the report, I had actually recommended that item number 5 be added to the consent agenda. Wondering if anybody else supports that.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett McDaniels. And at this time, staff will ask all other members of the board, if you, Ms. Barrett McDaniels is making a recommendation that agenda item number 5, let me pull this up for you real quickly here. Agenda item number 5, Chisholm RT, located at 1325 Chewink Court. Staff will go through real quickly what you are looking at today is a variance request to modify the November 26, 2012 CBPA Preservation Area Board variance to remove condition number 8. Condition number 8 of that variance stated exclusively of the boat basin, if and when the shoreline is rehardened, a riprap revetment shall be constructed in lieu of a vertical retaining structure, i.e. vinyl, timber, or steel bulkhead. The toe of said revetment shall lie at or landward of mean high water or tidal vegetated wetlands, unless the Wetlands Board determines that the site-specific conditions warrant a more seaward alignment. Having heard the recommendation from Ms. Barrett McDaniels, at this time, if there are any board members who do not agree with this item being moved to the consent agenda, please raise your hand at this time. Mr. Chairman, staff does not see any virtual hands raised. and would like to carry agenda item number 5 to the consent agenda. At this time, staff will call Mr. Garrington back to the microphone. Mr. Garrington, please let us know that your disclosure statements are current, your fees have been paid, and that you agree to the conditions in the staff report for agenda item number 5. Mr. Garrington, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, PJ, and thank you very much, Mrs. Barrett McDaniels. This is Billy Garrington on behalf of the applicant in this request, Mr. Chisholm, property known as 1325 Chewink Court. Our disclosure statement is current. All of our fees have been paid, and we're in agreement with the one condition, and we thank you very much for putting this on the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Garrington. Mr. Chairman, at this time, we have agenda item number 3, 625 Timberland Trail, agenda item number 5, 1325 Chewink Court, agenda item number 6, 1460 North Woodhouse Road, and agenda item number 8, 1000 Curlew Drive, all on the consent agenda. At this time, Mr. Chairman, staff will pass the microphone over to you to call a motion. The microphone is yours.
Would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
At this time, staff acknowledges the hand of Mr. McCoy. Mr. McCoy, the microphone is yours.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to approve item number 3, Kevin and Karen Barney. Item number 5, Chisholm RT. Item number 6, Reno Family BT. And number 8, Ralph and Brenda Knapp, item number 8.
Mr. Chairman, staff opens your microphone to call a second.
Would someone like to second Mr. McCoy's motion?
Mr. Jones, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Hearing a second, a motion to approve the following applications on the consent agenda. Agenda item number 3, 625 Timberland Trail. Agenda item 5, 1325 Chewink Court. Agenda item number 6, 1460 North Woodhouse Road. And agenda item number 8, 1000 Curlew Drive, has been made by Mr. McCoy and seconded by Mr. Jones. The vote is open, and staff will call each board member individually. If you are in favor of the motion, please say yes. If you are opposed, please say no. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Dreps, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. Yes.
Mr. Jester, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Jones, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. McCoy, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Smith, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Steyer, your microphone is open.
Yes. Yeah.
Mr. Wallace, your microphone is open.
Yes.
By a vote of 9-4, 0 against, the motion to approve the CBPA variance request for these 4 items of consent. Agenda item number 3, 625 Timberland Trail. Agenda item number 5, 1325 Chewink Court. Agenda item number 6, 1460 North Woodhouse Road. And agenda item number 8, 1000 Curlew Drive, have been approved. Mr. Chairman, at this time, staff will organize for one moment, and we will move on to the regular agenda items. The regular agenda items will be agenda item number 2, number 4, and agenda item number 7. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, the presentation of the regular agenda items is as follows. A summary of the application by staff, followed by statements by the applicant, their agent, and proponents of the variance request, statement by any opponents, rebuttal by the applicant or their agent, and then finally, deliberation of the application by the CBPA board members. Staff presents the following items. Agenda item number 2, 2800 and 2901 Baltic Avenue, Old Beach Villages Company, LLC. Agenda item number 4, 1440 West Little Neck Road. And finally, agenda item number 7, Atmore Lane, parcel GPIN 14799057771. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, before staff presents any of these items, are there any questions for staff, or will any board members be abstaining from any of these items? Please raise your virtual hand at this time. Having seen none, Mr. Chairman, staff will go into the presentation of agenda item number 2. Agenda item number 2, Old Beach Villages Company, LLC, property located at 2800 and 2901 Baltic Avenue. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, you all heard this agenda item at the February public hearing. At that time, this item was deferred so that the developer of these parcels could take time to consult with the attorney representing the homeowners association of the 2 buildings already constructed. The variance request that you have in front of you today is for a modification of the September 27, 2004 CBPA variance to encroach into the resource protection area with an elevated pedestrian bridge to 4 buildings. Going through staff's presentation, you will see an aerial of the site and the 3 parcels that are in question today. Looking at an aerial towards the Atlantic Ocean, you'll see the parcel to the north and 2 parcels to the south, or above and below in this situation. It'll actually be east and west. Looking at the existing conditions, this is for the parcel that is adjacent to the Harris Teeter parking lot. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the top photo taken from Baltic Avenue towards the Atlantic Ocean. That is the Harris Teeter parking lot on the right-hand side of that top photo. And then panoramic shots to the north looking down Baltic Avenue. On the right-hand side are the proposed improvements highlighted in yellow. You'll notice that Baltic Avenue is to the top of your screen, Arctic Avenue is to the bottom, 30th Street is to the right. Adjacent to 30th Street are the existing 4-story buildings and parking. When you apply the proposed improvements to the existing aerial, that is what you are looking at. Moving on to the next parcel on the west side of Baltic Avenue and adjacent to 30th Street. You start to see where that proposed pedestrian bridge comes into discussion. You will see that there is an elevated pedestrian bridge that goes over the existing channel, as well as one over Baltic Avenue. The proposed improvements with this parcel are highlighted in yellow, and you will see adjacent to 30th Street the existing 5-story building and associated parking. Looking at the site photos, these are taken from Baltic Avenue, looking west, so your back is to the Atlantic Ocean. On the top photo, you will see those the existing 5-story building and associated parking. And then panning to the right, you will see location of the existing BMP in the middle photo. And at the bottom photo, you will see that existing channel that works its way up to Baltic Avenue, and that is where the proposed pedestrian bridge will cross over to the adjacent parcel. When you apply these proposed improvements to the site aerial, this is the schematic site aerial, you will see the connection over Baltic Avenue and how these buildings start to integrate into the existing landscape. Continuing to the south, you have the existing conditions of the parcel that is adjacent across Baltic Avenue. Looking at the proposed improvements, and again, the connection of those pedestrian bridges in the lower right-hand corner. And then the site photos on the left-hand side of the page taken from Baltic Avenue, looking south on that top photo. That clearing in the background is the location of the proposed improvements. And then walking down, you'll see the open field. And then from the far end of the lot, looking north, back up on the parcel. That is a schematic site of where those proposed improvements fall. And at this time, that concludes staff's presentation. Are there any questions by members of the board for staff? At this time, please raise your hand. Mr. Chairman, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, PJ. So what I'm not clear on right now compared to the last time this was brought before us is in fact this a further encroachment into the 50-foot seaward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go back to, in regards to the further encroachment, staff has overlaid both the 2004 variance to the variance request that you have in front of you today. In regards to the 6 buildings that were approved at that time, there is a push and pull on some of the facades with regards to that. Overall, this staff is of the opinion that the proposed improvements associated with this are in substantial compliance with the 6 buildings that were approved by the CBPA board in 2004. There are some modifications being made to the buildings. Staff was trying to get a pointer up on to the screen, but it does not show. So if you're looking at the presentation up on the screen right now, on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see the building that is directly adjacent to Baltic Avenue. On the southern end of that building, There are additional encroachments with the, not only the pedestrian bridge, but the connection that is made to that building with the stairway so that people can access the different stories in that building. What is different from this variance request from the 2004, the 2004 variance request had both of those buildings on the left-hand side as one contiguous building. Right now there are two, and you will see between those two buildings that there is a pedestrian bridge. It is staff's understanding from the applicant's consultant that that bridge between those two buildings is not contiguous all the way down to ground level. So in that situation, in this layout, there's actually, even though there are some pushes with the existing facade, the location of the buildings remain in this, generally in the same location as those with 2004 variants. They do not encroach into the existing BMP, which is located to the south and to the west of those proposed buildings, and it does not show as much surface area parking that was proposed with the 2004 variants with this modified layout. In addition, staff has conditioned with this variance condition number 6 on page 16 of the staff report, which is in addition to those conditions for the 2004 variance. And that is the proposed surface vehicular parking spaces, those not located within the proposed structures, shall be constructed of a permeable pavement system, and a detail of the specific permeable paver system and sub-base construction shall be provided at site plan review submitted to the Development Services Center. At this time, Mr. Chairman, do you have any additional questions for staff?
So, BJ,
Yes.
you're saying that this is substantially in compliance with 2004, but it just looks different.
Yes. There has been some slight modifications to the facade of the building. A little push and pull here. In addition, there have been, it's staff's understanding that there have been additional modifications to the footprint, and Mr. R.J. Nutter, the attorney for the developer, may be able to speak to that in more detail. Staff brings that up because we have been in contact with both Mr. Nutter and Mr. Romero, who is representing the Homeowners Association, and they have conducted, I believe, 3 meetings since the deferral of this item. And Mr. Romero will also be able to speak to an agreement, I believe, that was reached last night, late last night, between the Homeowners Association and the developer, which staff emailed out to you all early this morning before the public hearing.
Thank you.
At this time, staff recognizes the hand of Mr. Wallace. Mr. Wallace, your microphone is open.
Yeah, thank you, PJ. I understand this particular application is for the pedestrian footbridge. But going to the page 17, item 15, where this variance focusing on the pedestrian footbridge says will supersede the conditions under the 2004 variance. I somewhat understand that the footbridge will have stairways that will go to the ground level, but is there any other, it gives me the perception that this whole thing is superseding whatever was established in 2004. But is there any other changes that, as part of the supersede conditions that you see?
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Yes, so staff added that condition in because of the additional conditions associated with these 4 buildings. Specific to condition number 3, which requires all areas seaward of the proposed improvements, exclusive of the existing BMPs, approximately 12,500 square feet, to be restored to a riparian buffer. That condition, or a condition of this type, was not associated with that prior variance. You'll also see condition 3B, which is requiring the amount of canopy trees associated with that buffer restoration. You'll also see condition number 4 that says the conditions of the existing CBPA variance, specifically the required stormwater management facilities, shall be documented on the revised plan, and then the documentation of those existing BMPs shall be provided, shall provide the health and the functionality of those BMPs. That was a big component of that prior variance. You'll also see condition 5 that addresses stormwater compliance for the proposed improvements. Condition 6, which staff just read in, regarding all surface area parking that is not contained within the footprint of a building be constructed of permeable pavers. And condition 12, which does not allow any additional perimeter fill associated with this, as well as condition 13, requiring Oyster Heritage payment for the proposed improvements, which was not associated with the 2004 variance for the 6 buildings. Mr. Wallace, at this time, staff will open up your microphone. Your mic is open.
Yes, PJ, so what you're saying, the superseding is actually adding conditions rather than deleting any of the conditions that were under the 2004. Am I correct in that?
You are correct in that staff has added conditions that were not applied to that 2004 variance. However, that 2004 variance will be superseded by these conditions in staff's report, with the requirement that the engineer of record verify that the existing the health and functionality of the existing BMPs on site to accommodate for the development of these parcels. At this time, staff acknowledges the hand of Mr. France. Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. This is going to require a couple of back and forth questions and answers, I think. But my first question is in the same vein as the other board members. Can you explain how the previous variances, so we've got a 1995 variance that was not acted upon, and then a 1997 variance that has not been completed, and then a 2004 variance that has not been completed, and a 2011 variance that was withdrawn. So it would appear to me that we've got several partial variance events with several different levels of requirements under them. And I need you to help me understand how you've resolved those unfinished criteria and how they've been incorporated into the current conditions I also am concerned with the superseding of the previous requirements in the new variance. End of question.
Thank you, Mr. France. At this time, staff has pulled up the staff report for this to go through those variance items. So the first variance request that we had was from November 27th, 1995. And in just a moment here. So the November 27th, 1995 CBPA variance was not acted upon. Although the variance was granted, you can see on the screen right now, as staff blows it up, it was to develop this parcel. You'll see in the center of your screen right here where the river comes up and connects to Baltic Avenue. With the 1995 variance, you'll see there was actually a bridge to shops proposed in that further west of Baltic Avenue. The intent was for both parcels to the west of Baltic Avenue to be developed commercially. You'll see it in this exhibit right here where you see 30th Street at the top of your page come in, and at that time it was actually proposed to cul-de-sac. Now that actually goes to the north and connects over to Laskin Road. With that development in 1995, you'll see where that bridge came over, and there were just these sort of generic areas for proposed improvements highlighted in blue. With the pedestrian plaza coming across the bridge, you'll notice the topo and the topography that works up to the right of your screen, east of Baltic Avenue. And then the parcel on the lower section, another area of development for commercial. From that, we transitioned into the 1997 variance, which was granted for the construction of the Harris Teeter Grocery, wetlands mitigation, and alteration to the previously approved plan from 1995. What you see on the screen right now is that proposed improvement. If you're following along in the staff report, that is page 21. You'll see again on the west side of Baltic Avenue, you'll see an area development, commercial development for the parcel located to the north, as well as an area development for the parcel to the south. On the lower right-hand corner, you will see the Harris Teeter grocery store and associated parking with that. And then just north of that, another commercial area. Portions of that variance request have been acted upon, specifically the construction of the Harris Teeter grocery store and associated infrastructure, as well as the stormwater management facilities. With this 1997 variance, if you look closely again along Baltic Avenue, you will see some sort of connection from that northern parcel out to the right-of-way. From that, we then transitioned into the 2004 CBPA variance. So the Harris Teeter was constructed. You'll see the parcel to the north. At the top of the screen, one of the existing buildings today that has been built is located at the top, and then Below that, you'll see this sort of C-shaped building that wraps its way around. Staff had mentioned earlier, all this area inside here was proposed parking and impervious. You'll see one little green island right here, and then underground parking that went all the way through, including the gap between the two buildings. The revised plan that you have in front of you today has a green space that works its way up with a pedestrian bridge, to staff's understanding, that goes from the residential floors and not the underground or at-grade parking underneath the buildings. In this variance request right here, you did not have any connection over the waterway. You also have the parcel located to the east of Baltic Avenue, which the buildings to the north have been constructed. And right now, the buildings to the south, with modifications to that building footprint, being proposed here. The variance request for, let me get the date correct here, the September 26, 2011 public hearing that was withdrawn was for this parcel right here. It's staff's understanding that at that time, that 2011 variance request was a potential location for the current iFly facility, which is located down off of Pacific Avenue. And then with that 2004 CBPA variance, if you're following along in your staff report, on page 23, you'll also see the drainage exhibit associated with that. At this time, Mr. France, staff will open your microphone up to you. Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. So I'm looking at the, specifically at the requirements of the 1997 variance, because it has a lot to do with mitigation and stormwater management. And also the 2004, again, restates some stormwater management and some buffer encroachments or non-encroachments. So again, explain to me why those things we would not have attached to the current set of conditions. Why are we superseding those requirements?
You actually bring up a great point. With staff's current conditions and the history on this, we would actually make a recommendation that instead of superseding it, that our conditions are in addition to, and then we could carry all of the history of this variance application forward. And with that comment, Mr. France, I will open your microphone back to you. Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. My concern with there's still an issue with how we bring forward all of the current conditions and the existing conditions. The stormwater management and restoration issues and those sort of things, I think, need to come forward, but there also are issues of layouts that this was tied to, that the new conditions probably do need to supersede the previous ones. And that's where I'm struggling with how to tie this whole thing together, because I think the way that staff presented it in superseding wasn't necessarily incorrect, but at the same time, there are bits and pieces of previous that need to be extracted and need to persist. So not only for the record, but so that at the conclusion of the project, we were ensured that all of those really important environmental things have been brought forward. So I'm concerned about just making this completely inclusive of all of the previous ordinance requirements, because I think we're going to set up a bunch of conflicts. And I'd like your opinion on that.
Thank you, Mr. France. Definitely a great point, and definitely one that, staff went back and forth on, especially with, concerns at the previous public hearing. Some concerns that you heard in regards to stormwater down there and some of the existing conditions that they deal with, part of which staff handled it the way that we did, because you're correct, it's very unique. We have a variance that looked at 6 buildings. We have 2 built. Those 2 that are built are operating separate of the developer who's now coming in to try and develop the other 4. So with the additional conditions that staff brought in with this 2020 variance request, as part of the reason why we kind of put in there that supersede, because we're requiring this portion of that previous development to go beyond what was required with that 2004 variance, in such that, we're requiring them to do the permeable pavement. We're not requiring the other 2 buildings to do any of that, but we do want everything associated with these 4 too. Also, the Oyster Heritage payment, that would be specific to these 4, as well as the buffer restoration. That 12,500 square feet would be specific to these 3 parcels and not to the other 2 that have been created with the proposed improvements on. So in kind of going through that thought process, that's where that condition 4 on page 16 came into play. With, even though these conditions supersede the 2004, it's still conditioned that the existing variance specific to the stormwater management facilities be documented, and anything that needs to be corrected. However, any new condition associated with this variance does not apply to the improvements of those other 2 buildings that have already been built subject to that 2004 variance. Hope that clears it up a little bit. And right now, I will pass the microphone back over to you for any comments. So, Mr. France, your microphone is open.
So in the proposed conditions, we've got item number 4 that deals with stormwater management. I don't see where it deals with the wetland mitigation and the tidal wetland mitigation credits and banking that were put into place. Is that addressed anywhere in your conditions?
Thank you for your comments, Mr. France. No, staff brought that in as a component of that condition number 4. Based off of the exhibit from that 2004 CBPA variance that you see on page 23. So what we can do with that condition number 4, we can actually add in the let me get this correct here. It would be the wetland compensation specific to the 1997 variance. And at this time, while staff looks through that condition, Mr. France, I will turn the microphone back over to you. Your microphone is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. Yeah, I think that what we need to look at in the conditions is bringing forward potentially all of the conditions that were associated with the 1997 variance. And again, it may be reading and rereading through there. I don't think that by bringing any of those forward, we're going to create conflicts, and it does make those compensations still compulsory with the variance. So that looks like it might work to me, but you guys have been reading these a lot more closely than I have. My other question then, getting back to stormwater, do we know whether this site is grandfathered or whether they're, are they trying to use the previous stormwater management, or are they bringing the site up to current code?
So, great question. They are working with our Development Services Center right now in regards to that. I know the engineer of record, MSA, they may be able to speak to that in more detail, but they are using the existing stormwater infrastructure out there. However, we'll have to go through a review with the Development Services Center to make sure that the quality and quantity is there as designed. I'm going to step back to the comments that you made in regards to pulling forward that 1997 and 2004 variance. I think that's a great idea, because in looking through the 2004 variance and the 1997, you have 3 variances that all apply, of which just a portion of each variance was constructed. So you have the Harris Teeter, you have the 2 buildings to the north with that, and then you have the what's being proposed here today. Looking at that 2004 variance, there was not a condition that addressed the those conditions being in addition to or superseding the 2004 variance. So I think with your comments and looking through the conditions of those variances, as well as the history with each variance having constructed a portion of what was requested, that pulling forward the 1997 and the 2004 variances with staff's condition number 15 would help tie all of the history of these parcels together. And with that, Mr. France, I will turn the microphone back over to you. Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. And that, I think, satisfies my concerns about the conditions. I appreciate your position on that. One last item, then I promise to try not to beat this up any further. We have submitted with our package here drawings from MSA. Those drawings, it appears, are showing us what the current proposed encroachments into BPA will be. I don't think that they show what the difference is between this application and the current approved application. If they depict that, can you point that out, please?
Yes, give staff just a moment, please. Staff may have to drop in here. Hold on one second. Oops. All right, there we go. Logged back in. Thank you. We will go to the presentation. So along the western portion of the west of Baltic Avenue on the northern lot, staff will drop into the presentation. Oops. All right, there we go. And what you will see, Mr. France, along the southern part of those buildings, specifically the one that clips adjacent to Baltic Avenue, you will see that encroachment for the pedestrian bridge, the stairwell, and a small portion of the building, specifically the left corner, that encroaches into the resource protection area, 50-foot seaward buffer. That's where the modifications are made, and those modifications are landward of the existing BMP. What is different, though, is between the gap between those two buildings is vegetated. The 2004 variance had that as a solid facade with parking underneath. So there's actually a balance with that further encroachment with the opening between those two buildings as pervious, whereas in 2004 they were shown as impervious. And with that, Mr. France, I will open the microphone to you.
Okay, so I understand that there's a slight modification for that area. You know, there's some adds and some deducts. but I don't think that that's been depicted. Part of this goes back to the last time that this was deferred. They came in and said, hey, the only thing that we're changing whatsoever is we're putting a couple of new pilings in the ground so that we can put this overhead walkway in, and nothing else is changing. And I think that I don't really have a huge problem with it, but I am unable to track, based on the information that we've been presented, what the previous amount of encroachment was and what the amount of encroachment is today. Even from a square footage perspective, it looks to me like we have I'm going back to your staff report on page 9. It says the proposed impervious cover of the site is 105,997 square feet, or 61.8% of the site. And then it goes on to say the area of new development in the RPA. I don't understand, based on the information we have, how that compares to what is currently allowed by the variance.
Thank you, Mr. France. Mr. Nutter is representing the applicant at the February public hearing. Mr. Nutter did have specific square footages and quantities for each parcel that he read into record. And we could ask him to reread those quantities at this time. With that, Mr. France, I'll open the microphone back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. So I guess we'll wait for the applicant to respond to that, but it's hard for me to understand. So maybe when the applicant is preparing his statements, where we are previous versus current, I'd like that let's make sure that gets part of the conversation. I think that I'm done with my comments and questions. Thank you for your time.
At this time, staff recognizes the hand of the chairman. Mr. Chairman, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, PJ. So Dave and PJ, I've been struggling with this because this is the fifth bite of the apple, and it begs the question, what's the minimum to afford relief? However, previous boards have approved quite a few things regarding this. So some of those, it is what it is. I think what has happened recently is that the developer has met with the neighborhood, and more of the changes are architectural in nature, so that when in fact this goes to city council, there'll be less opposition. But this is the opportunity for staff and us to make this water quality as tight as possible. And that's what I want to make sure that we've done. We can't undo what they've done in 97 and 04. But I like the idea of addition 2, and I just want to make sure that staff has really, really looked at this application and that we have covered all the bases, because, again, this is the fifth bite of the apple. Not many people get that opportunity, and I think our job is to make sure that the water quality control does not change and that we've incorporated things that are better than what was approved in 04. And that the neighborhood has been rewarded with some architectural changes that they wanted, so that this moves forward and is a more positive application than what has been approved in the past. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, are there any additional questions for staff? If so, please raise your hand. At this time, staff acknowledges the hand of Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, PJ. One question, if it's appropriate this time before the applicant's agent comes up, could we have the one opposition letter read in so that maybe when the applicant's agent comes up, he can address that as well? So we kind of curtail some of this back and forth. I hope they've been taking notes on everything that Dave and David said. I appreciate their diving into this one. And just, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. And yes, staff will, at this time, read the letter of opposition. This is in response to the Baltic Avenue plans for Old Beach Village. I am concerned about the total plan, not just the pedestrian bridge. Since natural water areas change over time, I would like to see a new wetland study completed on the effects of building on this marsh area. The site plan of the building on the northwest corner appears to be dangerously close to the existing building, the walkway, the marsh, and the bridge to the park. Mr. Nutter remarked at the last meeting that the revised plan was basically the same difference of the footprint here, a couple of inches there. These slight differences could negatively impact the wetlands. I also argue that if there are changes to the footprint, the plan is not the same and therefore is not approved under the previous guidelines. I did not attend the meeting with the developer because it was after the virus shutdown and should have been postponed. I assumed incorrectly that it would be rescheduled, so I was unable to share these concerns with the developer. I have registered for the June 1st meeting. That is the end of the correspondence. Staff will add that when we received this letter of opposition, we did reach out to the individual, had a conversation with them, asked if they would like to register to speak at today's public hearing, came to a conclusion that staff would read into record their letter of opposition, and we also sent their letter of opposition and contact information both to the attorney representing the developer as well as the attorney representing the condo association. At this time, are there any additional questions from the board to staff? Mr. Jones, staff acknowledges your virtual hand. The microphone is yours.
I'll just ask both the applicant's agent and the attorney for the homeowners if they could just address whether that letter was and the opposition was included in that revised letter withdrawing opposition, or if this is someone that is still in opposition to the application, or if that person is now not in opposition, since we just got the letter and the revised letter this morning. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. At this time, are there any additional questions from the board to staff? Having seen none, staff is going to, Ms. Barrett McDaniels, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
Thank you. I did have a question concerning the agreement that the neighborhood reached with the applicant. Mainly when we first heard this a couple months ago, there was great concern about flooding in the streets. And I actually went out a couple of times during rainfall events and didn't witness that. Has that issue been resolved with the neighborhood? And I do understand that if a site plan is submitted, they'll get full review of that issue as well. But I just wanted to know if that issue has been resolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett McDaniels. To staff's understanding, having gone back and forth with both the developer's attorney and the condo association's attorney over the weekend, and having received these letters last night at 11:45 p.m. and then again this morning at 8:55 a.m., that agreement has been reached. We have both attorneys online this morning to speak to that into the record. And you are correct. The site plan associated with this variance request will have to go through the Development Services Center for full site plan review. At this time, are there any additional questions for staff? Having seen none, staff is going to call forward the applicant's agent, Mr. R.J. Nutter. At this time, Mr. Nutter, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Nutter, when your microphone is open, please acknowledge your oath. Please state your name. Please indicate that your disclosure statement is current and your fees have been paid. Mr. Nutter, the microphone is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. My name is R.J. Nutter. I represent the applicant, Old Beach Village Company, LLC. I acknowledge the oath that you just dictated. All fees have been paid to date. The disclosure statement is current. And so thank you very much. I've tried to listen diligently to all the questions asked by members of the board. And so I think I'd like to just begin, if I could, by just going over some of the generic points of this application. But I would like to point out, particularly this application is only the second application by this applicant. The 1995 application was won by Harris Teeter. The 97 application similarly was by them. 2004 was the application by this applicant. That's true. The 2011 application, which was withdrawn, was for a completely different use, namely the iFly facility that has since been relocated in conjunction with the city to 25th Street. So this is really our second iteration, Dave, if you will, in coming to the board with this application. I'd also like to address the question of conditions. And one of the things I think we tried to do is we said last time that we had no objection to the elimination of the term that we would supersede the conditions of the previous one, primarily because we view these as more extensive. But fortunately, if you take this down, PJ, this may help you and the other board members. My client has indicated to me the conditions of the 95 and 97 variances that have been complied with thus far and which ones are pending and will be dealt with in this application. The 1995 application, conditions 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 were all completed. Condition number 3 in that application is currently pending and is included within this application. In 1997, conditions numbers 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 were completed, and condition number 3 is pending, and currently covered in this application. See, in 2004, where we added an additional BMP to cover the entire site, by the way, conditions of it were completed, and conditions 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, and 10 are pending and are all covered in a more restrictive manner in this application. So I hope that will help, Mr. France, and I understand your question. It was the applicant's intention here to comply with all of the environmental constraints, but to have a different design and building plan and building location. And that's the way we've approached it with Mr. Scully and his staff. So I understand the specifics of your question. I hope that addresses them for you. But it's not our intent to eliminate any of the environmental concerns. We really have it just a new building location. And of course, the sky bridge and the building locations, as PJ indicated to you, in our opinion are, and frankly, in staff's opinion as well, are substantially consistent with what the board approved in 2004. As we all know, anytime you have a development permit process, there's always give and take during the site plan process. So I wanted you to know that you were consistent with your staff and belief that these were basically the same location of the buildings that they were before. Again, some a little different pluses and minuses, but generically is felt to be the same. The primary difference here is, as Mr. Scully has indicated to you, is the addition of the skywalk features. And again, these features are elevated, as you know, 30 feet above the ground. They traverse on the west side of Baltic, connecting the building by Harris Teeter with the building behind the flats, the lofts, and of course the one that traverses across Baltic Avenue, which goes into the new building where the large parking structure is located, and so forth. So those were the primary differences. Mr. France, I didn't ever mean to indicate this is exactly the same. Those changes were also pointed out in staff review in the February meeting, so we're not hiding anything. But we felt they were basically the same application. The difference being the changes to the because of the bridge location and the support structures to support them. And you're correct. What I did indicate that the only thing was touching the ground differently was the 124 foot of area where the base of these structures would be located. We did go to great lengths to try to define that for you. And I'd also like to point out as a result of those changes, of those things, my client agreed to significant other improvements that would make this application even better than it was in 2004. Namely, we've added, as she's indicated, 12,500 square feet of additional buffer restoration, which is considerable given the size of the site. We've added a significant new number of trees, both large and small shrubs as well. We've agreed to the permeable paver provision. And while there was a $309 payment requirement in 2004 to the Oyster Restoration Fund, we have significantly increased that by over $7,000, so that the new amount is $7,645.68. So we've made significant improvements in the conditions, as you can see, in return for the ability to add these skywalk features, as we've indicated. I'd also like to point out that these improvements are largely above ground, and so we're happy about that, except for the base features. But finally, and I'd be remiss if we didn't tell you of the significant efforts we went through in meeting with the owners of the condominiums, Old Beach Village condominiums. Their representative, Mr. Romero, and of course, Mr. King. And we had our first meeting with them on May 19th. And we talked about how it would be held. We offered it to be virtual. We all, at the time, felt like the best way to do it was in person, and where we all met, socially significantly separated. We all wore masks, and it went on for about 2 hours. They were kind enough to provide us questions in advance, and that led to our proposal for a second meeting so that they could go back and discuss all they had heard during the first meeting with their other members who either could not be present or did not feel comfortable attending. So I'm happy to say that as a result of that, we went through a series of subsequent questions and answers, and started working on documents to enforce all of this last week. And as we would get through different issues, we would go back and sit down with my clients, and they in turn would sit down, review them with their clients. And I'm happy to say that went on throughout the course of the weekend. And I'll also share with you that I think it's the opinion of both of the attorneys in this matter that that process was beneficial to both parties. There were concessions made and understandings made of the development that really are not, you can't garner during the course of a public hearing. A lot of explanations to why things are where they are, where they're supposed to be. And I think that helped everyone. In addition to that, these are not just changes made to affect architecture. These are changes made to affect how this entire community will function. And in terms of parking, pedestrian access, all those features, how the amenities will be handled, how the access ways will be handled, what happens during construction. A significant number of all those issues were put on the table and I believe accomplished as a result of those meetings. So we were happy to come forth with the recommendation of that association. As to the letter of opposition, I do not believe that lady, or I don't know who it is, I apologize, lady or man, was part of they weren't part of the discussions. We did not have any of that information available to us when we were negotiating the transaction. But to the best of my knowledge, she would probably not be covered by the terms of the letter from the association consenting or withdrawing their consent. I'm sorry, withdrawing their opposition. And Mr. King reminded us that it's a 62-member organization and that they could not speak for everybody, and that some people, despite all the progress we made, may submit a letter of opposition. So I would have to assume that that letter is in addition to it would not be included within the condo association's consent. It would be just a normal opposition letter from an adjacent property. I'm also happy to say that the wetlands and stormwater questions, along with stormwater and the drainage issues, were gone into in great detail with Mr. King and myself and others. A little less on wetlands because we were relying on the wetlands delineations that were in effect today. And otherwise, I'm happy to tell you stormwater, drainage were heavily covered during the course of our negotiations and discussions. So I think I've tried to answer all of your questions that I garnered, but to the extent I've missed any, I'm more than happy to respond.
At this time, your 10 minutes is up, and we will now open up any questions to the board members. Board members, if you have any questions for Mr. Nutter, please raise your hand at this time. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
PJ, I'm sorry, I didn't realize my hand was up.
No problem, June. Thank you. At this time, staff acknowledges the hand of Mr. France. Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. Mr. Nutter, a couple of follow-up questions from your presentation. The first question I have is about the amount of impervious that we're adding to the CVPA resource as a result of this modification. I'm looking at the table included with the documents that were supporting the application, and it says total impervious area on the first line proposed 33,377 square feet, and a difference plus 33,337. But then when I look down further in the table, it has, quote, new impervious of 1,749 square feet, and then previously approved encroachments of 31,628. So the 31,628 plus the 1,749 equals the 33,377, which makes me interpret this that there's not a modification in this application of adding 33,000 plus square feet. It's really that you're adding 1,749. And I'm trying to understand whether all of that takes into consideration the adds and deducts and tweaks that have been made to the plan from the previous one in 04 to the current one. So that's my first question is, I guess, walk us through this table and help us understand exactly what the change is. And before I leave it and hand it to you, I will note that there is a note down at the bottom that says that the restoration for the previously approved encroachments will be provided as shown on the previously approved site plan. I think that is likely okay as long as the ratios are appropriate for our current regulations. And then the second question, leaving this table, goes to stormwater management, and I'm wondering if you can respond to my earlier question about whether or not this site will be employing the current stormwater regulations or whether you're relying on some sort of grandfathering from previous approvals. That ends my questions for now.
Thank you, Mr. France. Mr. Nutter, at this time, staff opens your microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. Mr. France, let me tell you what I've been advised. One of the detriments, I'm afraid, of the virtual meeting is that, particularly for an attorney, is you don't have the benefit of having your engineer and your client sitting next to you to answer questions. They're very good. So forgive me. I'm not going to try to mislead you in any way. But I would tell you what I was told about the 1,749 square feet was that it assumed that the total square footage, linear footage of the walkways would be an additional intrusion. And that's what I was told by our engineer. So I think the 1,749 would be the area underneath those areas, which would include the 124 square feet of area that I indicated. I asked them to just give me how much was on the ground, if you will. And so I believe the 124 will be included within that figure. I don't know if there's a table you're referring to. Is it in the staff write-up? I'm sorry, you can't respond, can you? No.
Mr. Nutter, the table that Mr. France is referring to is the table that was provided by MSA on the CB. Mr. Nutter, the table that Mr. France is referring to is the table that was provided on the CBPA exhibit by MSA. At this time, staff opens up the microphone to Mr. Nutter. Mr. Nutter, your microphone is open.
Forgive me, PJ, for doing this, but if it is in staff report, would you mind telling me the page?
Mr. Nutter, it is on the CBPA exhibit that was provided by MSA. and only the color renderings of the proposed improvements were provided in staff report. If you would, for one moment, please hold on. Camera crew, please keep the image of staff on the screen. Thank you. At this time, staff is looking for the variance exhibit with said chart. Please give us one moment as we go through our files. At this time, if the camera crew would please project staff's laptop to the screen, you will see if you could present the PDF. Hold on here one moment. There we go. Staff has duplicated the screen, Mr. Nutter, for you. If you are following along, the chart that Mr. France is referring to is now presented. At this time, staff opens up the microphone to Mr. Nutter.
Thank you, PJ. Fate would have it, I found it about the same time. So thank you. Mr. France, that's the chart you're referring to. In preparation for my last meeting, I asked our engineers the difference between where the 1,249 square feet came from. And he advised me that was from the walkway extension areas over those areas. So that's, to the best of my knowledge and belief, that's where that 1,749 square foot comes from.
Thank you, Mr. Nutter. At this time, staff will open up Mr. France's microphone. Mr. France, your microphone is open.
I don't have any further comments, PJ. Thank you.
France. At this time, staff acknowledges the hand of Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, your microphone is open.
Thank you, PJ. Dave, that was addressed, I believe, in the previous meeting, read into record. If my calculations are correct, if that's an 8-foot wide walkway, it's about 218 feet linearly. And they said something, I don't know if it was that specific to that account, but they did mention that the new impervious was that in the previous meeting. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. At this time, are there any additional questions for Mr. Nutter? If so, please raise your hand. At this time, staff acknowledges Ms. Barrett McDaniels. June, the microphone is yours.
I have no further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Barrett McDaniels. Having seen no other comments by board members for Mr. Nutter, at this time, staff will call to the microphone Mr. Joe Romero, representative of the Condo Association. Mr. Romero, the microphone is yours. Please hold for one moment. I'll correct that. Actually, at this time, staff acknowledges Mr. Ray King. Mr. King, we see you're on with us virtually. Staff has unmuted your microphone. Mr. King, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. And Mr. Romero was having some computer problems, so I think he dropped off the call inadvertently. Mr. Chairman, board members, we want to thank you for the opportunity to speak during today's hearing. I'm with law firm of Van Deventer Black, and along with Joe Romero, we have been representing the Old Beach Village Condominium Association in our negotiations with the developer in this matter. During the deferral of this matter from the February hearing, the association and the applicant have engaged in good faith discussions to reach agreements between them, as has been discussed, and the parties have reached an agreement that addresses a number of the association's concerns. As a result, the association is withdrawing its opposition to the application. To address the earlier question that was raised, we represent the association and not the individual owners who may continue to have objections or concerns about the development, and we are not speaking for those individual owners or their concerns. As noted by Mr. Nutter, I imagine that there are individual owners who maintain opposition, but we believe that the agreement that we have reached will provide long-term benefit to the association and its relationship with the developer. With regard to the concerns concerning flooding, and specifically on the development in this property, that we understand will be addressed in the site plan process as it proceeds through the approval process. Part of the agreement between the applicant and the association is an agreement that they will meet on a regular basis as the project moves forward. So we believe that we have a process in place to address these concerns as the project moves through the design process, approval process, and construction. Again, we'd like to thank the board for its consideration, the city staff for all of its work and support during this process. We have nothing further at this time.
Thank you, Mr. King. At this time, staff will ask board members if they have any questions for Mr. King. If so, please raise your hand. Having seen none, Mr. Chairman, staff will open it up for board's deliberation of the application. At this time, if there are any board members that would like to comment, please raise your hand. Mr. Chairman, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, PJ. I'm going to support this application. I'm impressed that the developer has met with the condo people in the neighborhood. They've addressed a lot of things that staff wanted. This was approved in '04, and again, and they could move forward on that, but they've decided to act on some things that staff would like to have improved, and it's very complex, but I think we have probably, between the neighborhood and what the staff has added in addition to this, probably a good application or a better application. Can't say it's good, but a better application than what was approved in '04. That concludes my comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, staff will acknowledge Mr. Wallace. Mr. Wallace, your microphone is open.
Thanks, PJ. And I thank the clarification from your staff and Mr. Nutter and David for bringing up the specifics that I had. Very concerned about when we jump from one variance approval to another, that there's dropping of variances or whatever you may want to call it. But I was very concerned, that's why I raised the issue on the suspending of previous variances. So I appreciate the articulation. I understand fully better now, and I think this is a good project. Again, thank you. Done.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Mr. McCoy, staff acknowledges your hand. At this time, your microphone is open.
Well, I think there've been some good comments, and again, I thank Mr. France for his in-depth review. I think we have the standards that we need to meet, and it's always troubling to me when we have serial variance requests, with the exception of when they get better. And I think, to Mr. Jester's point, the minimum deferred relief is a little bit, I've never really been excited about that concept, because minimum deferred relief is different depending upon the application. And when there's a good faith effort to work with existing shareholders, I'll put it that way, and then reduce the footprint in terms of utilizing pavers under building parking. All those factors, I think, come in. I really, I think this is a good application, and I'm going to support it. Over.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. At this time, are there any additional comments by board members? Mr. Chairman, having seen none, staff will hand the microphone over to you to call a motion. Mr. Chairman, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. Would someone like to make a motion on this application?
At this time, staff acknowledges the hand of Mr. France. Mr. France, the microphone is yours. Staff acknowledges. Oh. Technical difficulty. At this time, we will acknowledge your virtual hand. Mr. France, the microphone is yours. Mr. France, staff acknowledges your virtual hand. Let's try this one more time. Mr. France, staff acknowledges your hand. Please make sure that your microphone is unmuted. Open. You can't hear me though, can you? Okay. Mr. France, we've figured out our technical difficulty, and at this time, staff will acknowledge your hand. Mr. France, your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. And that technical difficulty, I believe, was on my end, not yours. Appreciate you bearing with me. I lost my computer for a minute. So I'm going to recommend that we approve the variance of Old Beach Villages located at 2800 and 2901 Baltic Avenue. Parcel numbers GPIN 2418913040, 2418913390, and 2418917293 be granted with the 15 reasonable and appropriate conditions offered towards preventing the variance from causing or contributing to a degradation of water quality as stated in the staff report based on the findings following. The change being that in the 15 reasonable appropriate conditions, we are going to make the conditions in addition to the previously approved variances on these sites.
Thank you, Mr. France. At this time, staff will hand the microphone over to the chairman to call a second. Mr. Chairman, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. Do we have a second for Mr. France's motion?
At this time, staff acknowledges the virtual hand of Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, the microphone is yours.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. At this time, Mr. Chairman, staff does not see any further comments. The motion for agenda item number 2, Old Beach Village Company, LLC, located at 2800 and 2901 Baltic Avenue, GPINs 2418 91 30 40, GPIN 2418 91 33 90, and GPIN 2418 91 72 93. A motion has been made by Mr. France, seconded by Mr. Jones. Staff will open the vote to board members. If you are in favor of this motion, please say yes. If you are opposed, please say no. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Dreps, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. Yes.
Mr. Jester, your microphone is open. Mr. Jones, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. McCoy, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Smith, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Steyer, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Wallace, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, by a vote of 9-4, 0 against, the motion for Old Beach Village Company, LLC has been approved. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
PJ, we've been at this for 2.5 hours. Let's take a 10-minute break.
Yes, sir. At this time, the CBPA board will take a 10-minute break. We will reconvene at 12:30 p.m. Thank you.
CBPA hearing is back in session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The next regular agenda item number 4, 1440 West Little Neck Road. The variance request you have in front of you today is to encroach into the resource protection area buffer to construct an in-ground swimming pool, modification of the existing paver patio, and expansion to the primary residence. If you will look up at the screen on the right-hand side, you will see the outline of the existing parcel. This parcel has a long flag lot driveway that goes back to a peninsula. The condition of the peninsula is heavily wooded. On the left-hand side of staff's presentation, you will see the existing driveway and garage in the background. The addition to the primary structure will occur in the footprint or in the vicinity of the existing garage. At the bottom of the screen, you will see the current condition of the rear yard. Up adjacent to the residence is where the proposed swimming pool is located. Last week, staff was out in the field at the property and met the applicant or the property owner. At that time, he discussed to staff that the construction sequencing for this project will be to remove the existing garage. When the existing garage is removed, they will utilize that for access to the rear yard to construct the swimming pool. After the swimming pool is constructed and that area demobilized, they will then go back to the garage and construct the addition to the primary structure. In doing so, the applicant's desire is to avoid having any adverse impacts on the existing mature canopy trees that you see both to the right and to the rear of the existing garage. Although there could be access around the side of the garage, the applicant said their desire, like I said, is to retain the existing trees and not have any impact on the existing root structure to them. Looking at the existing conditions, you will see the large exhibit where the driveway comes back. You have a very narrow circular drive, the existing paver walk patio off the rear, and then a enlargement of in the top left-hand corner where the proposed swimming pool is located off the rear of the residence, as well as the addition to the primary structure. All of these proposed improvements are located landward of the 50-foot seaward buffer. An enlargement of the proposed improvements are now shown on the screen. You will see where the edge of water is, the top of bank, and the location of those proposed improvements. In addition, staff has provided a panoramic of the rear of the property. At the top of the site photos, you will see on the top left-hand corner the existing vegetation. The area in the background where you can see that light gray siding is the back of the existing garage. And then we pan over to where the existing paver patio is. And then over on the top far right, the area where the proposed swimming pool will be situated, which is currently in a condition devoted toward turf with 3 mature canopy trees. On the bottom of the screen, you will see a panoramic from the rear yard looking out to the Lynnhaven River. From the top of bank down to the toe slope, there's a solid field of existing azalea shrubs, and within the existing azalea shrubs going down to the toe slope, There are small little mulch wood paths for the property owners to have access to the edge of water. With the proposed improvements, all of the existing vegetation that you see with the 3 photos at the bottom of the presentation will remain. Staff is of the opinion that the retention of the existing vegetation as well as the applicant's methodology to constructing the proposed improvements puts this variance request in harmony with the findings of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area Ordinance. At this time, staff will open up any questions that the board may have for us. Mr. Jones, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
I want to kind of reiterate some of Wayne's comments earlier. I've always had a hard time with the minimum necessary to afford relief, and keeping in tune with the CBPA's purpose. And I don't like serial applications, and I know this one had an application back in 2017. But I don't think this could have been a better application. I don't even know where they're going to put more trees. I would be even willing to back off on conditions to allow them to put understory and more shrubs on the property instead of canopies. You can't even see the house on any aerial photographs. I just think it's a beautiful application. They're tearing down part of the house so that they don't disturb the environment, and we're getting buffer restoration. I'm an absolute support of this application. I think the staff did a good job, the applicant did a good job, and I really like the application. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. At this time, are there any additional questions for staff? If so, please raise your hand. Should we go through and check just to make sure they're all back from the recess? Mr. Chairman, at this time, staff's going to deviate slightly. Since we did take a recess, I would like to call through the board members just to make sure that we have everyone back online and with us. So I'm going to go down and just acknowledge them like we would if a vote was being made. At this time, Ms. Barrett McDaniels, your microphone is open. Just please reply yes to staff.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Dreps, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Hey, PJ, I'm back.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jester, you are in the council chambers with us. We are good there. Mr. Jones, your microphone is open.
Here.
Mr. McCoy, your microphone is open.
Present.
Mr. Smith, your microphone is open.
Present and accounted for.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Wallace, your microphone is open. I'm sorry, Mr. Steyer, your microphone is open.
I'm here.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Wallace, your microphone is open.
Yes.
All right, thank you, everyone. Staff just wanted to make sure that we had everyone on with the return of our regular agenda items. So again, at this time, agenda item number 4, 1440 West Little Neck Road. If there are any questions for staff, please raise your hand. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, your microphone is open.
Thank you, PJ. I don't really have a question, but I will reiterate my disapproval of this application, primarily because it is, in our recent history, And at that time, they agreed that this was the minimum to afford relief. The older application had encroachment into the seaward, which I think could have been avoided had they thought the application through at the time. So I would like the applicant to discuss those issues and why they're back asking for more relief in recent history. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett McDaniels. Mr. Chairman, at this time, staff does not see any more board members' hands raised, and will call forth the applicant's agent, Mr. Eric Garner. Mr. Garner, before staff unmutes your microphone, please remember to acknowledge your oath, state your name, indicate that your disclosure fees are current, and that your application fees have been paid. Mr. Garner, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Garner, the microphone is yours.
I do affirm to tell the truth. My name is Eric Garner with WPL. I'm here on behalf of my client, Mr. and Mrs. Ashby. All fees have been paid, and the disclosure statement is current. We're here today to present a project for the proposed pool behind the southwest corner of the existing dwelling. The property was originally developed in the 50s at its current location. The owners purchased the property in 2006 and added a small patio in the rear from a previous 2017 board variance. After living in the house for the 4 years up until today, the owners have needed to expand the living area, which they're doing with the garage addition. They're rebuilding the garage and actually going up a floor as to not expand the footprint of the dwelling. However, with that project, they would like to also entail the improvement of a swimming pool. We have made some adjustments to the plan that you have on the board. We have shifted it to the north a little bit to be about 10 or 15 feet above the top of bank and a little bit closer to the dwelling, and reducing and encroaching a little bit onto the patio that was approved in 2017, as well as reducing a little bit of sidewalks. This does still keep us under 11% of overall impervious area. And I'll leave it at that for any additional questions.
Thank you, Mr. Garner. At this time, are there any questions for the applicant's agent? Please raise your hand. At this time, Mr. Chairman, staff does not see any hands raised by members of the board. At this time, staff will open the platform to members of the board for deliberation. If you have any comments, please raise your hand at this time. Mr. Chairman, staff acknowledges your hand.
Thank you, PJ. I'm like Mr. Jones. I think this is a good application. It's almost 4 years since they applied. It was a pretty modest application when they did apply previously. And I think this is not a significant change. And it looks like they tried to address the 50-foot seaward on this and the sensitivity of the site. So as staff is happy with it, It looks like a good application to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, are there any additional comments from board members regarding this application? Mr. France, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
PJ, did we ask for or get any opposition on this application?
Thank you, Mr. France. No, staff did not receive any opposition or inquiries regarding this variance request. Any additional questions for staff or the applicant's agent at this time from the board? Having seen none, Mr. Chairman, staff turns the microphone over to you to call a motion. Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Would someone like to make a motion on case number 6?
Mr. Jones, staff acknowledges your
Number
hand.
4, I apologize. I'm reading the next case. So, case number 4.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
Make a motion to approve agenda item number 4, John O. and Rachel H. Ashby, 1440 West Little Neck Road. Move that the variance be granted with the following 11 reasonable and appropriate conditions offered towards preventing the variance from causing or contributing to a degradation to water quality as stated in the staff report, based on the following findings as required in section 110H of the CBPA ordinance. And PJ, can I ask you one question before I finish this? About the canopy trees, do you feel that this site can support 4 more canopy trees?
Thank you, Mr. Jones. You bring up a excellent question, and staff is of the opinion, given the minimal amount of turf that is out there, the mature canopy and undergrowth vegetation, that if a modification is made to the number of canopies, that modification be added to the understory canopy trees so that a trophic layer is created. Thank you, Mr. Jones, and microphone is now open to you.
Thank you, PJ. So I'm going to add in as a modification to number 3, at staff's discretion, the necessary required trees, canopy trees, understory trees, can be modified at staff's discretion to allow for a trophic layer. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Chairman, at this time, staff opens your microphone to call a second.
The things that you want them to say.
Very good catch, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones, staff will open up your microphone to read in the findings for agenda item number 4. Mr. Jones, the microphone is yours.
Okay, I thought we were just assuming those, we didn't do it on the last one. But granting the variance will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges or convenience not accorded to other owners of the property in the CVPA who are subject to provisions of this ordinance and are similarly situated because the proposed improvements are in keeping with the development of the neighborhood and adjacent parcels. Number 2, the encroachment into the RPA on this lot is not based upon conditions or circumstances that are or have been created or imposed by the applicant, but rather is necessitated by the fact that this lot was platted prior to adoption of the CVPA and the city CVPA ordinance. Therefore, portions of the lot are within the CVPA. The variance is a minimum necessary to afford relief. The house was originally built in 1951. The lot was platted prior to the Bay Act. We feel the best areas for expansion redevelopment for the property is shown to help avoid additional impacts to the resource. The proposed improvements have been limited to landward buffer. The board concurs. The variance is in harmony with the purpose and intent of this ordinance and not injurious to the neighborhood, not a substantial detriment to water quality or otherwise detrimental to public welfare because of the additional proposed buffer restoration will help filtrate the runoff before being discharged to the water, coupled with the current condition of the mature riparian buffer on the lot. As a means towards a no net increase of non-point source pollution load, the applicant offers the planting, buffer restoration, and bioretention stormwater management will be placed between the improvements and the canal to capture and treat the runoff prior to discharging into the bay. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Chairman, staff opens your microphone.
Would someone like to second Mr. Jones' motion?
Mr. Wallace, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
Yeah, I second the motion submitted by Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Hearing a motion to approve the variance request at 1440 West Little Neck Road has been made by Mr. Jones and seconded by Mr. Wallace. The vote is open, and staff will call upon each board member individually. If you are in favor of the motion, please say yes. If you are opposed, please say no. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, your microphone is open.
No.
Mr. Dreps, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. France, your microphone is open.
No.
Mr. Jester, your microphone is open. Mr. Jones, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. McCoy, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Smith, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Steyer, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Wallace, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, by a vote of 7-4, 2 against, the motion to approve the CBPA variance request for 1440 West Little Neck Road has been approved. Moving along to our last agenda item on the regular agenda. Agenda item number 7, Atmore Lane, parcel GPIN 14799057771. The request that you have in front of you today is to construct a single-family residence with associated accessory structures. Looking at staff's presentation, you will see that this lot is a peninsula-shaped lot which has not been developed. The site aerial shows you the development that has occurred within the neighborhood on the adjoining lots. Looking at the existing conditions of the lot, staff has put together a panoramic at the top of the presentation. You will see the condition of the shoreline along the water's edge. You will see that it is relatively open, and as you transition up the bank to the center, you have a more shrub-based canopy tree layering. On the bottom of the presentation, you will see the shoreline at the peninsula. There are sparse areas of wetland vegetation Spartina alterniflora that is being shaded out somewhat by the trophic layers and canopy on the shoreline. With this application, the majority of the 50-foot seaward buffer will be preserved. Staff would like to point out in the staff write-up, specifically page one moment, please. Specifically page 97, underneath the evaluation. From the 3-foot contour, there's approximately 133 linear feet of uplands from shoreline to shoreline. That is a depiction of how narrow this peninsula is. As such, approximately 19,292 square feet of the 22,710 square foot lot is within the 50-foot seaward buffer. Having given the conditions of the lot, staff looks at the adjoining shoreline, again, coming down the peninsula, and then the access way from Atmore Lane, which you see at the bottom of the presentation. Looking at the existing conditions, staff has provided color to this exhibit. In blue, you will see the layout of the silt fence, which is approximately 10 feet outboard of the proposed improvements. And you will see the unique shape of this peninsula lot and how the 50-foot seaward buffer impacts both sides. With the proposed layouts, you will see that the proposed improvements try to follow the shape of that peninsula as best they can. Staff would also like to mention that we met with the applicant's engineer of record with the initial submittal. At that time, the proposed residence was turned about 90 degrees and ran perpendicular to the existing contours. During that meeting, Mr. Payne made a recommendation to the applicant's agent about shifting this proposed improvements so that they aligned more with the existing contours, and you will see that layout represented on the screen right now. In addition, on page 97 of the staff report, the second paragraph of the evaluation, staff made a comment, given the sensitive environmental features encumber the vast majority of this lot, that staff did not support this, the amount of impervious surface proposed specific to the use of materials. And staff wants to point out that specific to the use of materials on the application that was submitted, you will see the proposed driveway associated with the improvements as being concrete. Given the use of that material, staff has provided a recommended condition, and that is condition number 17 on page 100 of the staff report, that the proposed driveway shall be constructed of a permeable pavement system. In addition, given the shape of the peninsula and the environmental features present, staff has provided a series of conditions, beginning with condition number 1 of the staff report on page 98, that the pre-construction meeting shall be held with CBPA planning staff as well as our CBPA inspector. In doing that, we want to be present out at the site when we meet the contractor for the first time so that we can go over the specifics of this variance request, specifically condition number 2, requiring that the silt fence be installed and staked in the field by the engineer of record prior to that pre-submittal meeting. In addition, condition number 4, about all areas outboard being left in a natural state. Also, condition number 8, requiring a certified arborist report to provide during the site plan review process with a written verification as to the deposition of the residual riparian buffer, those portions of the riparian buffer to be removed, and the staff or the arborist report to ensure the construction activity not be detrimental to the remaining riparian buffer, in that critical root zone not be impacted for those trees being retained. Also, staff has provided that all remaining pervious area for this lot to be devoted to buffer restoration, as stated in condition 12 of the staff report, as well as stormwater management. On the plan that you see presented in front of you right now, you will see that gray line that encompasses the proposed improvements. That is a proposed bioretention planting bed for stormwater management. The width and depth of those bioretention planting plans often differ. In this case, or in most situations, they're anywhere from 18 to 36 inches deep. If you were to excavate a trench all the way around here to treat your stormwater, staff is of the opinion that that activity would impact those trees outboard of the limits of construction being retained. As such, you'll notice that staff has put in condition number 14 on page 100 of the staff report that says, in lieu of infiltration trenches shown on the CBPA exhibit, infiltration wells shall be utilized as a means to manage towards stormwater. Staff is of the opinion that the use of that would limit the amount of land disturbance and offer greater potential for the residual forest to survive post-construction of the improvements. And then lastly, as mentioned, condition 17, with the proposed concrete driveway being constructed out of permeable pavers, and then 18, that no perimeter fill is authorized outboard of the proposed improvements, and that these improvements are built into the existing slope. At that time, or at this time, do any board members have questions for staff regarding the application? Mr. Chairman, at this time, staff does not see any hands raised by, actually, correction. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, PJ. With the introduction of the pervious pavers versus concrete, does the staff now support the application? And then also, I have a question about the south side where the house and patio actually encroach into the bank of the river. Is that all some type of wall, or, because I just don't know how they'll get that fill, and the house is at 14 and they're on a steep slope there. So will that be retaining wall all the way around that portion, mainly the south side of the house? Thank you.
Thank you, June. To answer your first question, yes, given the 21 conditions that staff has written in the staff report, that is our opinion that we would support the variance request, having gone, like I said, over all those conditions specific to the driveway, stormwater, and pre-construction meeting. With regards to the driveway and the front porch, there is a retaining wall proposed along the edge of the driveway. Having walked the site, staff looked at the area where the walkway, concrete walkway to the front porch would be constructed. There could be use of the existing grade there, But staff also would like to point out one more condition that we brought up because Ms. Barrett McDaniels, you bring up a great question, and that is condition 16 of the staff report on page 100. The proposed wood deck and covered porches, both front and rear, shall be constructed of an open pile structure with underdeck treatment of sand and gravel installed under them. Because we shared your concern. The front porch, not so much as the rear proposed covered porch and wood deck, because there is much more of a grade change in that area than the front porch. That seems to be more or less getting up onto the plateau of the lot. And with that, staff will open up Ms. Barrett McDaniel's microphone for comment.
Thank you.
Time, are there any additional questions for staff? Mr. Chairman, having seen no additional comments, staff will call forward the applicant's agent. The applicant's agent for this application is Mr. Bourdon. Mr. Bourdon has been sworn in, so at this time, Mr. Bourdon, staff will open your mic. Please acknowledge yourself, state whether your disclosure statements are current and your fees have been paid. Mr. Bourdon, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, PJ. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, for the record, Eddie Bourdon, Beach attorney representing Tom and Jenny Justice and Jenny's sister, Linda Sarton. The applicant's disclosure is still accurate and all the fees have been paid. The subject property on Atmore Lane in Thorogood, which by the way is where Jenny and Linda grew up and went to Cox High School. Their mother still lives here in Virginia Beach. The Linda lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Jenny and her husband Tom live in Winter Park, Florida. They are purchasing this property to construct a retreat for their family. Tom and Linda suffered some tragedies in the last couple of years, and so this is simply being purchased to build this beautiful home in the woods as a retreat for their family. It'll be a smart home. It is their intention and always has been not to have any turf on the property. That's one of the conditions, but it wasn't imposed upon them. It was part of the original application. All of the conditions that PJ has described and that you all have discussed to some degree are all readily acceptable to my clients. This, as staff report states, but I want to cover a couple of these things. This lot is a peninsula that was platted in 1955 as a part of the plat of Thorogood. That's 36 years before the enactment of our Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area Ordinance. In just the last 12 years alone, the city has collected $69,000 in real estate taxes on this property. It's been assessed anywhere from $465,000 to $700,000 in value. The adoption of the Bay Act resulted in the entirety of this lot being within the RPA buffer. Over 85% of the lot, because of its peninsula shape, is in the 50-foot seaward portion of the buffer. The clients have spent a great deal of time, along with Dave Butler, finding an appropriate configuration of a home to be built on the lot. It's a two-story home. With the condition that the driveway, which again is just a basic driveway, you have to have the ability to, if anybody's been out there, you have to have the ability to turn around. That's why the little, outcropping on the south side exists. But with all that being impervious surface, the actual total impervious surface will be 22.9% of this lot. And the lot is non-conforming in square footage. It's only a little over 22,000 square foot of high land in the R40 zoning district. The other thing that the reduction in impervious, if you, and that's assuming it's a 40%. I didn't say that, I apologize. Assuming you take 40% as a credit for making it impervious, that's how you get down to 22.9, i.e. it's 60%, 60% impervious, 40% is taken off for being permeable. And it reduces to 16.2% from 27%, the percentage of impervious that is attributable to the access way. The lot is as impacted as any, and probably more so than any in Thorogood. PJ has touched on some of the conditions I was going to also cite, specifically keeping everything in a natural state. My clients, again, that's exactly what they want. That's exactly what they intend to do. They have no objection to going with the wells as opposed to the trench that Dave Butler had put on here. I have no objection to that whatsoever, because it will, as it is believed by staff, preserve more of the trees. We're all for it. The deck that Ms. Barrett McDaniels asked about has always been open pile with underdeck treatment. No retaining structure on that side as it pertains to the decking. I won't go through the rest of them that PJ has mentioned that I was going to touch on. The only other thing I'll say is that the staff report includes all of the necessary statements that we believe form the appropriate basis for the findings of the board to grant the variance as conditioned. And again, all 21 conditions are acceptable to the applicant. Be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bourdon. At this time, are there any questions for Mr. Bourdon from members of the board? Mr. France, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. I'm going to have a couple of questions, so I'll just start with one so we don't lose track of them. This proposed development does not show any water access whatsoever. Can you speak to the applicant's desire to have access to the water and its lack of evidence on the proposed plan?
Mr. Bourdon, staff opens your microphone to address the comment.
The applicant's only desire is to be able to put a kayak or a canoe in the water, which does not require any structural improvements. There may need to be a natural walkway to a certain point in order to be able to put a canoe or a kayak in the water, but they do not desire any facilities for power boats.
Thank you, Mr. Bourdon. Mr. France, staff will open your mic back up. Your mic is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. There's a couple of requirements in the conditions to provide infiltration wells. Have you studied the application of infiltration wells on this site well enough to know that you can comply with that as a required stormwater management application?
Thank you, Mr. France. Mr. Bourdon, your microphone is open.
Well, you know that I'm not an engineer. However, David Butler with Gallup has looked at the conditions, has worked closely with PJ, and he indicates that he believes that the soils will support the wells and the wells will work. The important part of this to preserve all the trees and not damage the roots is going to be the the work of the arborist, which is one of the conditions that PJ discussed, and the placement of these wells on the property. But it is his opinion that they can meet the required stormwater requirements. Sorry to be redundant. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Bourdon. Mr. France, staff opens your microphone.
That's all the questions I had. I'll have some comments later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. France. At this time, are there any questions for the applicant's agent? Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jester, staff acknowledges your hand. Your microphone is open.
Just one curious question, Eddie. So, I mean, obviously this lot is squeezed every way you could possibly squeeze it, but what's the amount of living, just curious, the amount of living space they're going to build? It doesn't look like a huge house.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bourdon, your microphone is open.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for not having a specific number of square feet, but there is 2 bedrooms upstairs. It's a 2-story house. There are 2 bedrooms upstairs and 3 bedrooms downstairs with a cooking area. I may get an answer here real quick. My client's listening in and they have my number. Here we go. 2,600 square feet. 2,600 is the total square footage of the living area of the house. It's a 2-story house.
Thank you, Mr. Bourdon. Mr. Jester, any other questions for Mr. Bourdon at this time? Your mic is open.
No, I just was curious. It didn't look like a big house, so I just wanted to check that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, staff does not see any other hands raised, and we will open up to members of the board for deliberation. Members of the board, if you have any comments, please raise your virtual hand at this time. Mr. France, staff acknowledges your hand. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. A couple of thoughts on this application. First thought is on staff's recommended conditions number 14 and 15, these stormwater wells. I think the intent here is good, and that's to try to limit the impacts of the construction that's outside of the foundations of the house on the surrounding trees. So, kudos to staff for identifying that as a potential issue, and I agree. My disagreement with the way that these 2 conditions are written is more in that it's prescriptive on the type of stormwater management installation that's used. And whomever makes the recommended motion on this, I think we should consider changing the language there a bit so that we have them pull the BMPs out of the critical root zones, but perhaps leave it to the design engineers and DSC to determine which of the many, many types of BMPs they might use on this facility. The second thought I have is that I wish there was a way with the Schmidt Amendment to say we really, really mean it this time, because we have this recommendation number 20 that says that this is the maximum impervious the site can support. And as I led with my questions to the applicant's agent, there are some things visibly missing from this site plan that I can just imagine somebody in the future might come back and ask for. And so I don't know with this condition if there's a way to make it say we really mean it this time. Overall, I think this is a tough one because, as staff said, they feel like it's a lot of impervious being squeezed onto the lot. But this lot was created in 1955, and it seems to me like the applicants have done a lot of homework here and worked hard with staff to try to get to something that is a good application, and one that, with a couple of changes to the conditions, I overall support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. France. At this time, are there any other comments? Haven't seen Mr. Jester's hand. Mr. Jester, your microphone is open.
Thank you. You know, this is one of those lots that's just squeezed to death by the Bay Act, and it was platted in 1955, and it's not a crazy size house. It looks pretty reasonable. It must be a really pretty lot, because to meet all the staff conditions, get you guys happy, they're going to spend a boatload. So I am impressed with all the things they're willing to do to make this thing as compliant as they can with the environment and not have a net source point increase. So I'm also going to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, staff acknowledges the hand of Mr. McCoy. Mr. McCoy, your mic is open.
Well, actually, I guess I didn't pull it back in time. I'm going to support it. I think it's a reasonable application. You know, I don't think there's anybody that sits on this Bay board that loves to see the loss of this number of trees. But a 2,600 square foot house is, in my opinion, very reserved. I'm surprised it's not 5,000, because that would be the typical development that we see. I share Mr. France's concern that there be nothing going forward, especially if they decide to sell this property. But unfortunately, I don't think that there's any way to reinforce feelings going forward with other boards. So I'm in support, and I think it's.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. At this time, are there any comments from the board? Having seen none, Mr. Chairman, staff will pass the microphone over to you to call a motion. Mr. Chairman, the microphone is yours.
Would someone like to make a motion on this application so that we can move on after 3 hours? Thank you.
Staff acknowledges the hand of Miss June Barrett McDaniels. Miss Barrett McDaniels, your microphone is open.
Thank you. I move that the variance of Richard Abrahamian estate located at Atmore Lane, parcel GP IN 14799057771 be granted with the following 21 reasonable and appropriate conditions offered towards preventing the variance from causing or contributing to the degradation of water quality as stated in the staff report, based on the following findings as required in section 110H of the CBPA ordinance. Granting the variance will not confer upon the applicant any special privilege or convenience not afforded to the other owners of the property in the Chesapeake Bay preservation areas who are subject to the provisions of this ordinance and are similarly situated, because this subdivision was recorded many years prior to the adoption of the Bay Act. And as a result, every waterfront home is significantly impacted by the ordinance. Since the enactment in 1991, numerous homes have made similar variance requests and have been granted, so the approval of this request will in no way confer any special privileges to the current owners. The encroachment into the RPA on this lot is not based upon the conditions or circumstances that are or have been created or imposed by the applicant, but rather is necessitated by the fact that this parcel was platted prior to the CPA and the city's CBPA ordinance, therefore placing the entire lot within the RPA. In addition, the staff provides that the overall impervious cover of this lot is 25.7% for the land area above water wetlands, with 58% of the overall impervious cover allocated to the primary structure. 27% of the overall impervious cover allotted to access driveway and front walkway, and 15% of the overall impervious cover allocated to accessory structures, front porch and rear deck. The variance is the minimum necessary to afford relief, as inherently a subjective standard that must be considered on a case-by-case basis, taking into account the specifics of a particular request. When considering the minimum necessary to afford relief, things such as the size of the structure, the types of the proposed structures, and the placements of the structure in relationship to the size, layout, and location of the lot or parcel are important considerations. The board adds that given the challenges of this lot, the applicant's engineer of record has demonstrated merit towards its exception to the requirements of the CBPA ordinance, situating the proposed single-family residence parallel to the existing topography of the lot and utilizing a retaining wall for the proposed driveway to limit the land disturbance within the RPA. The variance is in harmony with the purpose and intent of this ordinance and not injurious to the neighborhood, not a substantial detriment to water quality or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare, because the totality of this exception begins with the public hearing process and continues to the conclusion of the construction phase. As such, the board recommended condition below as a means to provide adherence to this exception during the construction phase of variance request. Strict erosion and the sediment control measures do more to halt non-point source pollution, stockpiling materials on existing hard surfaces, single point access way, and revegetating and denuding areas all help to limit pollution from entering the adjacent waters as a means to manage towards a no net increase in non-point source pollution load. If properly implemented and maintained, the board concurs with the statement provided by the applicant's agent and offers additional methods such as a pre-construction meeting prior to the construction of the proposed improvements, specifics with the layout and approval of the erosion and sediment control measures, and restricting the alteration of existing topography on the lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett McDaniels. Mr. Chairman, at this time, staff passes the microphone over to you to call a second.
Would someone like to second June's motion?
Staff acknowledges the hand of Mr. McCoy. Mr. McCoy, your microphone is open.
Okay, just as a point of clarification, the applicant is actually Thomas Justice III and Virginia Justice and Linda E. Sartain. And with that clarification, I second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Good. Hearing a motion to approve the variance request at Atmore Lane, parcel GPIN 14799057771. At this time, staff's going to stop. Mr. France, staff acknowledges your hand. Your microphone is open.
Thanks, PJ. We're in discussion of the motion. I wanted to ask Ms. McDaniels if she intentionally left in the language about the wells being prescriptive, or if her motion was perhaps wanted to have any amendment to speak to that. I'm just curious what her intention was.
Thank you, Mr. France. At this time, staff will open the microphone for Ms. Barrett McDaniels. June, your microphone is open.
Thank you. I do have concerns about putting any type of infiltration system in there. However, if staff is involved during the site plan development as well as Dave Butler's input, I trust that that issue will be thoroughly addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett McDaniels. At this time, staff will open up the microphone of Mr. France for any additional comments. Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. So my concern in taking into consideration that response is that in our required condition number 14 and required condition number 15 on page 100 of the staff report, the first one reads that in lieu of infiltration trenches, infiltration wells shall be utilized as a means to manage stormwater. And it goes on. And then number 15 talks about the proposed infiltration wells shall be landward of the proposed silt fence. So we've got two required conditions here that are making it such that the BMP that they use has to be a well and can't be infiltration trenches. I don't think that's a great idea for us to stipulate that type of thing any more so than anything else that we, should be leaving up to the design of the site once the site designers get into the design. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. France. At this time, staff will open the floor to board members for comments. Are there any comments? At this time, staff acknowledges the hand of Ms. Barrett McDaniels. June, your microphone is open.
Thank you. I understand Dave's point. What I think the difference between the infiltration that's shown on the plan versus what staff is recommending is that you would sort of have, you would avoid the major tree roots by having separated trenches. Is that what I understand, PJ? That you would stop and start the trench when you felt that a major root system would be interrupted?
Thank you, Ms. Barrett McDaniels. Staff's intention was to avoid having a trench essentially around the perimeter of all of the proposed improvements and seaward of them. We have a limits of construction that is shown on the demolition plan, and our intent was to, yes, avoid trenching this peninsula and further impacting any significant roots or critical root zones of the existing canopy trees. In doing that, we had conditioned the use of infiltration wells because we felt that their footprints were more compact and could be spot located instead of linearly located on this peninsula, and then also requiring those facilities to be within the limits of construction. So setting those limits and holding true with them and not impacting any of the residual riparian buffer seaward of those limits. Thank you. At this time, staff will open the microphone back to June. June, your microphone is open.
Thank you. So how will you determine the location of those wells as time goes on? Is that going to be something that's going to be discussed? I'm sorry, I missed that part. That I thought that somebody would be out there and determine where those locations are, but they're currently not shown anywhere on any plan. Is that right?
To answer your question, June, you are correct. They are not shown. Staff has consulted with the applicant's engineer of record, Mr. Butler, because he has used those types of facilities on previous plans. Those facilities will be cited by Mr. Butler, should the variance be approved, prior to submittal of the site plan to the Development Services Center. In addition, he also would have the opportunity, if needed, to utilize the conditioned permeable paver driveway as a BMP if needed, since a retaining wall will be used and potentially open up for a gravel reservoir underneath that surface. And at this time, June, I will open the microphone back to you for any comments.
Thank you.
At this time, staff will acknowledge the hand of Mr. Jester. Mr. Jester, the microphone is open.
Out here. Can we just modify her motion to say that it will be either a trench or a well, depending on what is the least detrimental to any of the root system around the house? So that both parties will have the opportunity to do what's best for construction and best for the plants.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, staff will acknowledge the virtual hand of Mr. France. Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Thank you, Mr. Scully. I think that it's clear that Ms. McDaniel's motion was intended to stand. The applicant's agent stated that they were comfortable with being tied to prescriptive wells, and I would like to call for the question.
Do I gotta open it back up? Thank you, Mr. France. At this time, staff will open the floor for a motion,
I think he called for the question.
or call for a
You
question.
can vote now.
Yeah, you vote now.
Thank you. So, motion was made by June Barrett McDaniels, and hearing a second from Mr. McCoy, the motion was to approve the variance request at Atmore Lane, GPIN parcel 14799057771. As staff stated, a motion has been made by June Barrett McDaniels, seconded by Mr. McCoy. The vote is open, and staff will call each board member individually. If you are in favor of the motion, say yes. If you are opposed, say no. Ms. Barrett McDaniels, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Dreps, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. France, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Jester, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Jones, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. McCoy, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Smith, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Steyer, your microphone is open.
Yes.
Mr. Wallace, your microphone is open.
Yes.
By a vote of 9-4, 0 against, the motion to approve the CBPA variance request for Atmore Lane, parcel GPIN 14799057771 has been approved. Mr. Chairman, at this time, that concludes our regular agenda items. I would like to thank all members of the board for their participation in our virtual public hearings and let you know that our next public hearing will be June 22nd, held in council chambers. At this time, Mr. Chairman, staff passes the microphone over to you for the conclusion of today's meeting.
This meeting is adjourned.